At her wedding, my own daughter called me the help. Her new in-laws openly snickered at my clothes. I let them finish humiliating me. Then I quietly picked up the mic and made one announcement. Their faces went pale. Can you imagine the ultimate gut punch? Picture this. Your own daughter, on her wedding day, standing before 350 guests you've personally invited and paid for, and introducing a complete stranger as her father. Meanwhile, you're sitting alone at a back table, utterly invisible. What the hell would you do next? Because I'm Jim Hayes, and that moment of betrayal set the stage for a comeuppance nobody in that glittering room, especially not my daughter, ever saw coming. I just shelled out $500,000 for this fairy tale, for Victoria's dream wedding. Every vendor, every exquisite flower arrangement, every gleaming piece of crystal, it all came from my bank account. Yet, there I was, the dead father, relegated to table 18, practically by the kitchen door, where the catering staff rushed by and the sound system hummed with a slight buzz. It was where families seated the relatives they had to invite but didn't want to explain. And Victoria? She was at table 1 center stage, bathed in the spotlight, living her grand illusion with her new family, the Whitmores. Preston Whitmore III was her husband-to-be, heir to a fortune so old, it made my grandfather's Ohio farm look like a new development. They had money that was generational, a different kind of wealth than what I'd built. But here's the kicker, the crucial detail Victoria conveniently forgot when she wrote me out of her story. Every single contract had my signature. Every payment came from my company. And I was still holding the final check for $340,000, the one that kept her perfect reception running. Without it, this whole meticulously planned charade would crumble. 26 years. 26 years of raising that girl. From scraped knees to bedtime stories, from dance recitals I never missed, except for 3 emergency calls. First pipes don't wait for convenient times, but I always made it up to her. I paid for her private school when public education wasn't good enough, $14,000 a year for Fairview Academy. I bankrolled her college, Yale no less, $68,000 a year for 4 years. Then her Manhattan apartment when she couldn't find work post-graduation, $3,000 a month for 2 years. And now this wedding. The venue rental alone, $180,000. Catering, $85,000. Flowers, $28,000. A string quartet from the New York Philharmonic, $15,000. $12,000 for the photographer. An $8,500 7-tier cake. Every single detail. I pulled my 2019 Ford F-150 into the valet line at the Ashford estate, behind a parade of Bentleys and Mercedes. The valet kid, barely 20, eyed my truck like it was a dead fish at a 5-star dinner. My rental tuxedo, $89 from Men's Warehouse, felt like a costume against their custom-tailored suits. I built Hayes Plumbing and Property Solutions from the ground up, starting in '94 with a used van and a toolbox. 16-hour days, 7 days a week for 5 years, living on peanut butter sandwiches and pure grit. But I learned things. I listened. When a lawyer had a leaking faucet, I learned he was selling his building. I bought it, fixed it, rented it, then bought another. Now I own 23 properties. Last year, $8.9 million in revenue. My net worth? Over $12 million. Victoria? She knew none of this. To her, I was still the guy who came home with dirty hands and grease under his fingernails. The guy who embarrassed her at parent-teacher conferences because I wore my work clothes. The guy who wasn't sophisticated enough for her Yale friends. She had no clue her simple plumber dad owned more property than half the so-called socialites in this room. And then, the text message. My phone buzzed. From Victoria. Daddy, please don't mention the plumbing business tonight. This is important to me. 30 years of sacrifice, reduced to an embarrassment she wanted to manage. A gut-wrenching confirmation of everything I feared. I watched Victoria float through the crowd in her $32,000 Vera Wang gown, all practiced grace. Our eyes met as I entered, and she looked away. The wedding planner, clipboard and headset, approached me. You must be. She checked her list. Table 18. By the kitchen door. The indignity stung. Victoria, of course, was at table 1 center stage, with her new, fabricated family. When guests asked her about her father, she'd point toward table 1, smiling. "My father's right over there," gesturing to Richard Morrison, a distinguished silver-haired man I'd never seen in my life. Meanwhile, my table filled with +1s and distant cousins. Nice enough people, but definitely not Connecticut Society page material. We made small talk, polite and hollow. Nobody asked what I did for work. Probably for the best. The cocktail hour stretched on, and the distance between my table and hers felt like miles. Every pose she struck, every beaming smile with the Whitmores, every role she played as the grateful daughter they'd saved from obscurity, felt like a twist of the knife. If I stayed silent tonight, I'd lose more than just money. I'd lose myself. My self-respect. I'd be letting her build a marriage on a foundation of lies, teaching her that family loyalty was negotiable based on social status. The consequences, I knew, would ripple through our family for generations. I reached into my jacket pocket, feeling the folded papers, bank statements showing the $500,000 transfer, contracts with my signature as the sole financial guarantor, email threads with the wedding planner. 23 messages over 4 months, all addressed to Mr. Hayes and copied to Victoria. She knew. She knew exactly who was paying for this fairy tale. The first guests who recognized me were a shock to the system. Margaret Henderson, whose flooded basement I'd personally fixed last winter. Dr. James Walsh, whose medical building we'd renovated. Sarah Chin, whose restaurant's plumbing emergency I'd handled on Christmas Eve. Jim Hayes. Margaret's face lit up. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Father of the bride," I said simply. Her expression shifted. Confusion, then understanding, then, devastatingly, sympathy. Oh my. Victoria never mentioned. "She keeps her private life private," I said, but Margaret's voice had carried. Nearby conversations paused. Eyes turned our way. The whispers started. "That's the plumber. Victoria's father." I thought he was. Didn't she say her father passed away? The story spread like wildfire, like spilled wine on white linen. Faces changed, surprise, awkwardness, some pity, most just plain uncomfortable. Preston Whitmore Sr., 72 years old, silver-haired, in a $4,000 bespoke suit, noticed the commotion. He approached my table with the confident stride of a man who'd never been denied anything. "You must be Jim," he said, extending a manicured hand. "Preston Whitmore. Victoria's told us so much about you." A polite lie. Victoria had told them nothing. "Have we met before? You look familiar." "I fixed your kitchen pipes last March," I said, my voice flat. "Emergency call Sunday morning. You were hosting a charity brunch." His smile flickered, just for a second, then returned, more forced this time. "Ah, yes. Well, you do excellent work." "Thank you." Victoria is fortunate to have such a practical father. Practical. Not successful, not accomplished, just practical. Like a tool you keep in the garage. He patted my shoulder, a gesture so condescending, so dismissive, and moved away. But the damage was done. The entire room now knew the bride's father was the help. I watched Victoria's reaction from across the room. She'd seen the conversation, seen the whispers. Her face flushed red, then went pale. She said something sharp to Preston 3, who immediately looked in my direction. Not friendly, but with curiosity, assessment, like he was calculating whether I posed a threat to his perfect evening. The string quartet played Pachelbel's canon. Champagne circulated. White orchids flown in from Hawaii filled the air with expensive perfume. But the mood had shifted. What started as elegant anticipation now carried an undeniable undercurrent of tension. Guests kept glancing between my corner table and Victoria's center stage position. The math simply didn't add up. Catherine Brooks, the venue manager, appeared at my elbow. "Mr. Hayes, is everything all right?" Professional concern. She knew which signature was on the contracts. "Everything's perfect, Catherine," I said, emphasizing my calm. "If you need anything at all, please let me know immediately." She understood. Then Preston 3 made his way over to me. 28 years old, Harvard MBA, trust fund baby, who'd never earned a callus in his life. His handshake was weak, the grip of someone who'd never held anything heavier than a golf club. "Sir," he said, "I want to thank you for raising such an incredible woman." "She is incredible," I agreed. "Victoria mentioned that you've had some challenges over the years." "Challenges, like working for a living, was a character flaw." "We all have challenges," I countered. "And of course, but I want you to know that she'll never have to worry about money again. The Whitmore family takes care of our own." Our own. Like Victoria had been adopted out of poverty, instead of choosing to abandon her family. "That's generous of you," I said. "Family is everything to us. Blood or otherwise. Blood or otherwise." The insult was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria might carry their name, but she'd never truly be one of them. She'd always be the girl they rescued from working-class obscurity. Preston 3 smiled, the kind of smile sharks probably wear before feeding, and returned to his table. But he missed something. My attorney, Richard Poulson, sat 3 tables away. He'd flown up from Florida just for tonight, carrying a briefcase with documents that could change everything. "It seems excessive, Jim," he'd said over the phone. "She's your daughter. She loves you. This is just wedding stress." But Richard had never had to sit at table 18 while his daughter introduced strangers as family. I'd asked him to be here just in case. Now I knew it wasn't paranoia. It was essential. Catherine Brooks approached my table again, this time with 2 assistant managers. "Mr. Hayes," she said quietly, "could we speak privately for a moment?" We stepped aside. "Sir, we've had some inquiries about the final payment schedule. The catering team needs confirmation on the outstanding balance. $340,000. The contract specified payment before service begins." I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app. Hayes Property Solutions business account. The balance would make most people dizzy. But more importantly, it showed the pending transfer to Ashford Estate Catering. Scheduled for 9:15 p.m. Not completed. "Is there a problem with the payment?" Catherine asked. "No problem at all," I said, a slow, deliberate smile forming, "as long as the service meets the standards we agreed upon." Her expression shifted. 15 years in hospitality had taught her to recognize real authority. She knew who the client was. My phone rang. Unknown number. David Chin from Fairfield County Social Register. "Mr. Hayes, this is David Chin. We're covering the wedding tonight. I'm not interested in interviews. Actually, sir, I was calling about the catering situation. I understand there's been some confusion about the payment structure. Someone had talked." "No confusion," I said. "Everything's exactly as it should be. Will the reception proceed as scheduled?" "You'll have to wait and see," I said, and hung up. Preston Whitmore Sr. was holding court, regaling guests with stories about his $2 million yacht. Old money loves an audience. But old money also makes assumptions. They assume wealth means understanding how wealth works. They assume social connections are business relationships. They assume a working-class man in a borrowed tuxedo poses no real threat. Tonight, they were about to learn the difference between having money and controlling it. The ceremony was about to begin. Victoria's moment of triumph. But every perfect moment depends on someone keeping the lights on. And I was the one holding the switch. 8:45 p.m. dinner service was in full swing, the mood shifting from tense cocktail hour to full-blown celebration. The ceremony had been flawless. Victoria radiant in her Vera 1 gown, Preston 3 playing his part with practiced perfection. Even I had to admit, they looked good together. But the real test was about to begin. Preston Whitmore Sr. stood to give his toast. The room quieted. 350 guests turned their attention to the head table. Crystal glasses caught the light from those $25,000 chandeliers. The moment felt suspended, perfect, like a photograph from a society magazine. Friends, family, and honored guests, Preston Sr. began, his voice carrying the authority of old money and older privilege. "Tonight we celebrate not just the union of 2 young people, but the joining of 2 families." Polite applause, knowing smiles. Everyone understood their role. "Victoria," he continued, turning toward my daughter. "You have brought such joy to our family. Your grace, your intelligence, your character, these are the qualities that make us proud to call you our daughter." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. But he wasn't done. But I especially want to thank the man who raised you to be the remarkable woman you are today. Preston Sr. raised his glass and looked directly at Richard Morrison, the distinguished stranger sitting at the head table. To Victoria's father, a man who embodies everything we admire about integrity and dignity. The room erupted in applause. 350 people rose to their feet, glasses raised toward a man who had never changed my daughter's diaper, never stayed up all night when she had a fever, never sacrificed a single thing for her happiness. Victoria beamed, her smile radiant and grateful. She raised her own glass toward Morrison, mouthing, "I love you, Daddy," for all to see. 26 years of fatherhood, erased with a single toast. Victoria often tells us how fortunate she is to have been raised by such a principled man, Preston Sr. continued, his voice carrying across the room with perfect projection. How his guidance shaped her into someone who understands the importance of family loyalty and doing what's right. In a world where so many young people lack proper role models, Victoria had the blessing of a father who taught her the difference between class and mere wealth. The irony was so thick, I could taste it. Richard Morrison, Preston Sr. gestured grandly toward the impostor. "Thank you for giving us the gift of your daughter. Tonight we officially welcome her into the Whitmore family, knowing that the values you instilled in her will guide her for the rest of her life." The applause was thunderous. I watched as guest after guest turned toward Morrison, nodding approval, some wiping away tears at the touching tribute to fatherly love. No one looked at me. I sat at table 18, invisible in my borrowed tuxedo, watching my daughter accept praise for values I had taught her, while crediting a man she'd probably met 6 months ago. But then, something shifted. Margaret Henderson, who'd spoken to me earlier, stood frozen, glass halfway to her lips. Dr. Walsh looked confused, glancing between Morrison and my corner table. Sarah Chin had stopped applauding entirely, staring directly at me with growing outrage. They remembered. They knew who the real father was. And they weren't the only ones. Catherine Brooks stood near the kitchen entrance, her professional smile strained. She held her phone, probably checking on that final payment that still hadn't processed. Her assistant managers flanked her, all three watching my table with barely concealed anxiety. The catering staff had paused their service to listen, but their supervisor kept glancing at his watch. 9 p.m. final payment deadline. They'd been told service might be interrupted. Preston Sr. concluded his toast. The room exploded in celebration. Guests surged toward Morrison. Victoria hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. David Chin from the Fairfield County Social Register stood near the exit with a photographer, both watching intensely. Chen's phone was already out, recording. Richard Polson, my attorney, was near the stage, briefcase in hand. When our eyes met, he nodded once. "Ready." My phone buzzed. A text from Catherine Brooks. "Sir, we need to speak immediately. Payment issues." I stood up from table 18. The room was still celebrating, but a few guests noticed my movement. Margaret Henderson watched me with growing understanding. Dr. Walsh went pale. I walked slowly toward the stage where Preston Sr. still stood, basking in applause. Each step felt deliberate, final, a point of no return. Victoria saw me coming. Our eyes met, and in that instant, I saw it, real fear. Not social anxiety, but the kind that comes when you realize your carefully constructed world is about to crumble. She'd built this new life on lies, on borrowed sophistication. She'd traded family love for social acceptance, status over substance. But she'd forgotten the most important rule of any transaction: always know who holds the real power. And tonight, she was about to learn that power isn't inherited. It's earned. Preston III stepped protectively closer to his new wife. Preston Sr., still oblivious, probably thought I was coming to thank him. He had no idea I was coming to introduce myself. I reached for the microphone. "Excuse me," I said. The room didn't quiet immediately. Conversations continued, guests still caught up in the emotional high. But those closest to the stage began to notice a man in an ill-fitting tuxedo approaching the microphone that had just been used to honor someone else entirely. Preston Sr.'s expression shifted from confusion to alarm. Sir, I'm not sure this is. My name is Jim Hayes, I said, my voice carrying across the room, amplified through the sound system. And I'm Victoria's father. The effect was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. 350 people turned to stare at the man who had just disrupted their perfect evening. Victoria went white. Preston three-stepped forward, probably planning to have me escorted out, but I held up my hand. For the past 30 minutes, you've been celebrating the wonderful father who raised my daughter. I gestured toward Richard Morrison, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. That man has never met Victoria before tonight. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God." Preston, I continued, looking directly at Whitmore Sr. I appreciate your kind words about integrity and values, but you directed them at the wrong person. Richard Pohl's son appeared at my side, briefcase open. He handed me a folder of documents, bank statements, contracts, email printouts, undeniable evidence. This is the contract for tonight's venue, I said, holding up the papers. Signed by James Hayes. That's me. This is the catering agreement for $85,000. Also signed by James Hayes. The flowers contract for $28,000. The musician contract for $15,000. Every single vendor agreement for this evening. I could see faces in the crowd shifting from confusion to understanding. Margaret Henderson was nodding grimly. Dr. Walsh looked sick. The total cost of this wedding is $500,000. Every penny paid by Hayes Property Solutions. That's my company. The room was dead silent now. Even the catering staff had stopped moving. Hayes Property Solutions, I continued, is a company I built over 30 years. We started with residential plumbing and grew into commercial property management. 23 locations, $8.9 million in annual revenue. Not bad for a simple plumber. Catherine Brooks approached the stage, flanked by her assistant managers. "Mr. Hayes," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We need to discuss the final payment authorization." "Perfect timing," I said. "Of course, Catherine, you need the final $340,000 before you can complete tonight's service." Preston Sr. looked confused. "What final payment?" "Everything was arranged." "Everything was arranged by me," I said. "Through my attorney, my accountant, and my business manager. The Whitmore family has no financial involvement in tonight's celebration." I turned back to the crowd, many of whom were now pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming the most dramatic moment in Greenwich social history. For 6 months, Victoria asked me not to mention my work at wedding events. She was embarrassed that her father was just a plumber. She wanted to fit in with her new family's social circle. I understood that. I wanted her to be happy. Victoria's tears were flowing freely now, but these were not tears of joy. But tonight, she went one step further. She told you all that her father was dead. She introduced a complete stranger as the man who raised her. She erased 26 years of our relationship to maintain her social status. The crowd was restless now. Whispered conversations, shocked expressions, phones recording everything. "Preston," I said, addressing Whitmore Sr. directly. "You spoke beautifully about family loyalty and doing what's right. You praised the values that shaped Victoria into the woman she is today. But you gave credit to the wrong man." I held up a printed email thread. These are communications between Victoria and wedding planner Melissa Chin. 23 emails over 4 months. Victoria was copied on every message. She knew exactly who was funding her dream wedding. David Chin from the Social Register was recording everything. His photographer captured every stunned expression. "So now we come to the final payment," I said, addressing Catherine Brooks, but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. $340,000 to complete tonight's service. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded check. The final payment Catherine needed. The check that would keep the reception running smoothly. The room held its breath. "Catherine, as the client whose signature appears on every contract, I have a question. Does this venue provide service to people who are ashamed of their families?" Catherine looked trapped. "Sir, because I'm not interested in funding a celebration of my own humiliation." I looked at the check in my hands. $340,000, made out to Ashford Estate Catering, signed and ready. Then I tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper carried across the silent room like a gunshot. The contracts are void, I announced. No final payment means no continued service. I believe that's standard hospitality industry practice. Victoria screamed. Not a cry of surprise, but a full-throated scream of panic and rage. You can't do this, she shouted. This is my wedding. Yes, I said calmly. It was. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then chaos erupted. Victoria launched herself toward the stage, her $32,000 gown trailing behind her like a silk accusation. Daddy, you can't. Please, there has to be another way. But there wasn't another way, I said. That's what she'd never understood about business. When you make certain choices, you eliminate certain options. When you burn bridges, you can't walk back across them. Preston 3 grabbed my arm. You're insane. You can't destroy my wife's wedding over some petty grudge. It's not a grudge, I said, shaking off his grip. It's a lesson in consequences. Catherine Brooks was already on her radio, speaking rapid-fire instructions. Attention all stations. Service suspension in effect immediately. Secure all payments. Contact vendor supervisors. The catering staff began clearing tables with professional efficiency. Servers collected wine glasses from startled guests. The string quartet stopped mid-piece, instruments lowering in confusion. Preston Sr.'s face had gone purple. This is outrageous. I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you for everything you're worth. On what grounds? Richard Polson stepped forward, briefcase still open. My client fulfilled his contractual obligations. He paid $260,000 up front. The final payment was contingent on satisfactory service completion. The service was satisfactory. Preston 3 interjected. Was it? I asked, my gaze piercing. Because part of the service I paid for was treating my family with respect. That didn't happen. Dr. Walsh approached the stage, his face grim. Jim, I owe you an apology. I should have said something earlier. No apology needed, James, I said. You're not responsible for my daughter's choices. Other guests were reacting differently. I could hear fragments of heated conversations. Despicable behavior. How could she do that to her own father? The Whitmores should have known. David Chin from the Social Register was interviewing guests, his photographer capturing every moment of the collapse. This wouldn't just be local gossip. It would be documented, published, permanent. Victoria collapsed into a chair, her perfect wedding dress pooling around her like spilled champagne. 26 years, she sobbed. You're throwing away 26 years over one night. I'm not throwing anything away, I said. You already did that when you told 350 people I was dead. The venue was emptying rapidly. Guests gathered their belongings, some offering quiet words of support, others clearly eager to escape the family drama. The old money crowd, especially, looked profoundly uncomfortable with such raw displays of emotion. Preston Whitmore Sr. made one final, desperate attempt. Hayes, let's be reasonable. Name your price. Whatever you want. Money, property, business connections. We can work this out. You think this is about money? I asked, folding the torn check pieces and putting them in my pocket. Everything's about money, he retorted. That's where you're wrong. This is about something you can't buy, respect. Catherine Brooks approached me one last time. Mr. Hayes, for the record, your account shows the venue rental and initial catering payments were processed successfully. The incomplete final payment voids the extended service agreement, but the facility usage through 10 p.m. remains valid. Professional to the end. She understood contracts. Thank you, Catherine. You and your staff have been excellent. For what it's worth, she said quietly, in 20 years of managing events, I've never seen someone handle dignity under pressure quite like you did tonight. Within 30 minutes, the wedding reception had transformed from an elegant celebration to an empty ballroom. Victoria sat alone at table 1, her husband and new in-laws huddled in an urgent conversation near the exit. Preston 3 kept glancing at his wife with something that looked like disappointment, maybe even disgust. This wasn't the sophisticated family he'd thought he was marrying into. Richard Morrison, the fake father, had slipped out early, probably recognizing that his role in the evening's deception wouldn't reflect well on his own reputation. "Victoria," I said, approaching her table. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Are you happy now? You've ruined everything." "I didn't ruin anything," I said quietly. "I just stopped paying for it." She wiped her nose with a cloth napkin that probably cost more than most people's dinner. 30 years building your precious business, and you destroy it all in one night. My business will be fine. It's built on real relationships with real people who value honest work. But your marriage. I glanced toward the Whitmores, still in heated discussion. That might be a different story. Preston III was gesturing angrily at his father, his voice carrying across the now-empty ballroom. "You said you'd handled the financial arrangements. You said everything was covered." "We assumed," Preston Sr. began. "You assumed wrong." Preston III snapped. "Do you have any idea how this looks? My wife's father just publicly humiliated our entire family." Victoria flinched at the word humiliated. "The Social Register reporter got everything," Preston III continued. "Photos, quotes, financial details. By tomorrow morning, everyone in Greenwich will know we hosted a wedding we couldn't afford to pay for." That was the real wound for them. Not that Victoria had lied. Rich people lie about inconvenient relatives all the time. The problem was that the lie had been exposed publicly, dramatically, with undeniable evidence. In their world, image was everything. And their image was now permanently stained. Richard Pohl's son packed his briefcase. "Jim, legally speaking, you're completely protected. All contracts were properly executed. The payment structure was clearly defined. No court would find fault with your actions." "Thanks, Richard. But personally speaking," he added, "that was either the bravest thing I've ever seen, or the most devastating. Maybe both." Victoria stood slowly, her dress rustling. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to wait for me to come home from work. "I loved you," she said, her voice raw. "Despite everything, I loved you." Past tense. "You just destroyed my marriage before it even started." "No, Victoria. You did that when you chose shame over family. I just made the consequences visible." The Whitmores finished their conference and approached us. Preston III's face was cold, calculating. The romantic room had been replaced by a businessman assessing losses. "Victoria," he said, "we need to discuss our options." "What options?" "Damage control, media management, financial restructuring." He glanced at me dismissively. "This situation is manageable, but it will require significant adjustments to our original plans." Even now, he was speaking in corporate euphemisms. Their marriage wasn't wounded. It required adjustments. Their humiliation wasn't devastating. It was manageable. Victoria looked between her husband and her father. For the first time all evening, she seemed to see both men clearly. Preston III represented everything she thought she wanted: status, security, acceptance into a world where appearance mattered more than substance. I represented everything she'd been trying to escape: working-class origins, earned rather than inherited wealth, values that couldn't be bought or borrowed. "I need to think," she said. "Think quickly," Preston III replied. "The longer the story circulates, the harder it becomes to contain." He wasn't asking if she was okay. He wasn't apologizing. He was managing a public relations crisis. "Daddy, will you ever forgive me?" she called out as I prepared to leave. I stopped at the ballroom entrance and looked back at my daughter, standing alone in her wedding dress amid the empty tables and cold chandeliers. "Victoria, forgiveness isn't something you ask for once and receive forever. It's something you earn every day through your choices." "What does that mean?" "It means the next move is yours." The story broke in the Fairfield County Social Register Sunday morning. David Chen's article ran with the headline, "Wedding of the Season Ends in Financial Drama as Bride's Father Cancels Payment." It included photos, quotes from unnamed guests, a detailed breakdown of costs. By noon, it was everywhere. By evening, national. Victoria called me at 7 a.m., her voice raw from crying. "It's everywhere, Daddy. Everyone's talking about it." "What are people saying?" "Some are calling you a hero. Others are saying you're vindictive and cruel." She paused. "The Whitmores aren't talking to me." "What about Preston?" He's evaluating our situation. His words. Evaluating. Like she was a business investment that had suddenly become risky. Victoria, what did you expect? You built your marriage on lies. Lies have consequences. I know that now. By Monday morning, the financial implications were clear. The Ashford estate pursued the Whitmore family for the unpaid balance. Vendors demanded payment. The wedding industry gossip network had spread the story to every planner, caterer, and venue manager in the tri-state area. Preston Whitmore Sr. called me Tuesday afternoon. Hayes, we need to settle this like gentlemen. I thought we already did. This publicity is damaging both our families. My business relationships are suffering. My son's marriage is under strain. That's unfortunate. I'm prepared to offer compensation for the financial inconvenience you experienced. He still didn't understand. He thought this was about money. Preston, you can't buy your way out of this. Your family participated in erasing me from my daughter's life. Money won't fix that. Then what do you want? I want Victoria to decide who she really is, and I want you to stay out of that decision. The social consequences rippled through Greenwich society like aftershocks. The Whitmores found themselves disinvited from events, board positions restructured. The patriarch's reputation was tainted. But the most significant consequence was within Victoria's marriage itself. Preston III, it turned out, had married Victoria partly because his family viewed her as a project, a beautiful girl from modest circumstances who could be molded into a proper society wife. The discovery that her circumstances weren't modest at all, and that she'd been willing to lie about her family to gain acceptance, undermined everything he thought he knew about her. Meanwhile, my working-class community rallied. Margaret Henderson stopped by my office. Jim, I owe you an apology. When I saw you at that wedding, I should have spoken up. You don't owe me anything, Margaret. Yes, I do. We all do. Everyone who knew what kind of man you were and stayed silent while they tried to erase you. Dr. Walsh sent a letter. Sarah Chin called personally. The publicity that was supposed to embarrass me had actually enhanced my professional reputation. Standing up for your principles, even at significant personal cost, was seen as a strength. 3 business owners contacted Hayes Property Solutions about partnerships. A real estate developer wanted to discuss joint ventures. A regional bank requested a meeting. Victoria and Preston III attended marriage counseling for 2 weeks before he filed for annulment. His grounds: fraudulent misrepresentation of family background and financial status. Legal documents that would become part of the public record, ensuring that Victoria's deception followed her forever. She moved back to her Manhattan apartment, the one I'd been paying for throughout her marriage. For the first time in months, she was truly alone with the consequences of her choices. Friday evening, she called again. The annulment papers came through today. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you really, Victoria? I never wanted your marriage to fail. I wanted it to be built on truth. Well, now I have nothing. No husband, no family, no reputation. You have the same thing you've always had, the choice to be who you really are instead of who you think people want you to be. And if I make that choice, if I stop being ashamed of where I came from, then maybe we can start rebuilding what we lost. It's too late for that, I said. It's only too late when one of us stops breathing. Until then, there's always tomorrow. The line went quiet for a long moment. I'll think about it, she finally said. That's all I've ever asked for. 6 weeks later, Victoria knocked on my office door. Not my home. My office. Hayes Property Solutions. Building A, Suite 101. The headquarters of the business empire she'd been too ashamed to acknowledge. She looked different, simpler. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweater instead of designer clothes. Most importantly, her expression had changed. The artificial sophistication was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years: genuine uncertainty. Hi, Daddy. Hello, Victoria. Can we talk? I gestured to the chair across from my desk. The same desk where I'd planned her wedding payments 6 months earlier. The same chair where she'd sat as a teenager complaining about homework while I finished paperwork. How are you doing? I asked. Honestly, terrible. The annulment made the papers. I lost my job at the gallery. Too much negative publicity. Most of my friends from the Whitmore circle won't return my calls. She paused. But do you know how exhausting it is to pretend to be someone else every day? To monitor every word, every gesture, every opinion, to make sure it fits the image you're supposed to project. I waited. She needed to say this in her own words, at her own pace. I've been thinking about what you said, about earning forgiveness through daily choices. She looked around my office, taking in the awards on the walls, the photos of completed projects, the evidence of 3 decades of honest work. I want to make different choices now. What kind of choices? I want to work. Real work. Not managing social events or picking out flowers for charity galas. I want to learn the business that built everything I took for granted. I studied her face, looking for signs of performance or manipulation. What I saw was exhaustion mixed with determination. The look of someone who'd hit bottom and decided to climb back up instead of staying there. The business isn't glamorous, Victoria. It's early mornings and difficult customers and problems that don't have elegant solutions. I know. I've been reading about property management, about commercial leasing, about building maintenance. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for a chance to prove I can contribute something real. What about your trust fund lifestyle? Your Manhattan apartment. I gave up the apartment. I'm staying at an extended stay hotel until I can afford something modest. She managed a weak smile. Turns out when your father cuts off your funding and your husband annuls your marriage, you learn about budgets pretty quickly. For the first time in months, I felt something I'd thought was permanently lost, pride in my daughter. There's a junior position open in our residential services division. Customer service, some basic project coordination. It pays $38,000 a year. That's more than I've ever earned in my life. It's also more than most people your age earn without experience. But you'd be starting at the bottom, reporting to managers who are younger than you, dealing with customers who might recognize you from the newspaper coverage. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't about redemption or making up for past mistakes. This is about whether you genuinely want to build something worthwhile, or whether you're just looking for another form of security. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. 6 months ago, I would have said I wanted security. But security based on pretense isn't really security at all. It's just delayed disappointment. She met my eyes directly. I want to build something real, even if it's small, even if it takes years. The job starts Monday. 8 a.m. dress code is business casual, not country club casual. I'll be there. As she stood to leave, Victoria paused at the door. Daddy, thank you. For the job. For teaching me that self-respect isn't something you can inherit or marry into. It's something you have to earn. Now you're starting to understand what I've been trying to tell you your whole life. She smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from her in years. She walked out to begin the hardest work she'd ever done, becoming someone she could be proud of. Man, that was a tough lesson for both of us. But seeing Victoria finally choose truth over appearances, it makes me wonder. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to stand up for your values, even if it meant shattering something beautiful on the surface? Or maybe, have you ever had to walk away from a lie, no matter how comfortable it felt? Let me know in the comments below. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this one.